Securities offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through CWM, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Carson Partners, a division of CWM, LLC, is a nationwide partnership of advisors. This is The Way to Wealth, with host Scott Ford, a jiu-jitsu fighting, woodworking, beekeeping entrepreneur who is also the managing director, partner, and wealth advisor of Carson Wealth. Financial freedom is the goal, and clarity and simplicity is how we'll get there. Let's get to it. This is Way to Wealth.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Way to Wealth podcast, where we're all about making money simple so that you can focus on living and living now, not 30 or 40 years from today. Because look, now is really all we have. So with that, very excited to have with me a special guest on the podcast, Mindie Kniss. And we'll give you just a little bit of background on Mindie. We actually did a podcast together where she was gracious enough to have me on her podcast. And so wanted to reciprocate because we had a great conversation and enjoyed the flow of that conversation. So let me give you just a little background, and then I'll ask Mindie to share a little bit of her backstory with you as listeners of The Way to Wealth. So Mindie, PhD, is coach, international speaker, best-selling author, and award-winning humanitarian. Long bio because she's done a lot of stuff. The only other thing I want to make sure and add is she's founder and CEO of Lucra, thriving training company over the next decade. So I want to talk a little bit about that, Mindie. But before we get there, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a bit of your backstory, what gets us to this podcast today, where you're talking to me, sharing with my audience, and what's up with Lucra and the founding of that company and exactly what's that about.
Okay, awesome. So there are, of course, a lot of different details, and I'll kind of keep it to the brief brush strokes. So right out of college, I got a pretty great job at a Fortune 100 company, and everything was sort of set. Good pay, good people, good job, good benefits, all the things that check, check, check. And I intended to only be there for a few years because I thought, this is not my life purpose. I want to go out and explore something else. I'm an adventurer by heart. So I thought, 2 to 3 years, I'll pay off my student loans and I'll be out, right? And then these things called the golden handcuffs came on to me. Yeah. And 7 years later, I was still at that company. And I'm like, what am I doing here? This is not what I set out to do by any stretch of the imagination. So that year was actually the year that I did win that fellowship award for the humanitarian work I had done. I went to live in Nairobi, Kenya, and having the space away from my normal day-to-day routine, life, etc., it really gave me a different perspective. And I thought, do I want to continue working at this job when I go home? The answer was a resounding no. So then the next question was, okay, well, what then? What are you going to do? What do you want to do? And I really just looked at what I did already, kind of behind the scenes, and who I was, which was coaching. So I have been a natural coach. People tend to just trust me, tell me things all throughout my life. And I thought, there's this thing called life coaching. Maybe I should look into that. So I had this crazy big plan of, I'm going to leave my job in a year and all of this. And the universe kind of worked it out magically. Whereas 2 days before I left from Nairobi, Kenya, it turned out that I was laid off anyway. So I thought, this is kind of awesome. I'm planning to leave. Now you're laying me off. And the best part was I had intended to leave in a year. And they said, you'll have a year to decommission the plant, do all these things, and then you'll get let go with a severance. I'm like, this is exactly what I already planned. The universe kind of just worked it out for me. So fast forward a year, I leave that company. I decide crazily enough to move across the country to Portland, Oregon. I'm going to, restart everything in my life just fresh. And went out guns blazing, all about glory. Like, I'm going to be a millionaire by next year. This is going to be amazing. I'm so excited. And then 2 years into that game of being an entrepreneur, I had been evicted from my apartment that I was living in. My house that I still owned in Michigan was foreclosed. I ended up living out of my teensy tiny little one-room office space. And then on top of that, the year after that, I filed for bankruptcy. So all of that is to say that it didn't exactly go as planned, or completely the opposite as far as I was concerned. So what I had to do was learn everything I could about marketing and sales, because earlier on I just thought, hey, I know that I'm a pretty decent coach. The phone should be ringing. The people should come to my website. Like, where are all the potential people? Of course, that's not how it works. I was, blissfully naive, I would say, at that time. So had to really just dig in, figure everything out, was able to then get to $100,000. And that to me was like the greatest thing ever. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I've now won the lottery. Then, kind of in the midst of that, I met my husband. He was in the same industry. We end up connecting, we get married, everything's great. We then work on Lucra together. So we decide he is a professional speaker, I'm a professional coach. Why don't we just work all this together, build one company? So that's awesome. So that definitely, let's just say, fast-tracked my trajectory. He had a lot of visibility. He was a little bit famous in that space. And so that was awesome. And then 2019 happens. He ends up passing away from a freak accident. So real quick, it wasn't something that we had planned for. And essentially then I had to start all over again. Then COVID happens. So it's like one thing after the next. And it's just, to me, it's all about getting back up each time, because life is going to kick you down. And sometimes it's a little way and sometimes it's a big way. But it's like, okay, if I'm here to do this work that I 100% believe that I am here to do, then none of that is going to stop. I mean, until I'm actually dead, like none of that's going to stop the work or my purpose for being here.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. And it feels like you've lived many lives in this span of life thus far. There's a lot.
There is a lot. And I would say that, yes, it does feel that way.
Yeah, which is, in beautiful in its own way. And so the beauty is you're getting back up. The other thing you had mentioned that made me think is the golden handcuffs and how easy it is to end up living someone else's goals and objectives and priorities. And it's like, it's so easy to get sucked into that, all of us, me included. And that's not what we want. We don't want to get to the end and look back and go, I wish I had. We want to get to the end, go and say, I'm glad I did. And I think the only way to get there is do what Steve Jobs said at, I think it was a Stanford commencement speech when he was diagnosed with that cancer. And he said, the biggest benefit of being diagnosed with this type of incurable disease is I could care less what anyone else thinks about what I'm doing. I'm going to be congruent with who I am and what I believe I'm here to do. And I'm like, yeah, boy, that's a great point and well said. And it sounds like you had, maybe not that same extreme of an experience for that type of wake up, but you did have the opportunity to come to that same conclusion. And what I personally believe that we're missing the most, which is maybe a benefit of what we had with the pandemic, is space and margin. Having the space and margin which you had when you were able to have that time away to reflect and think and get congruent with who you really are and what you're really supposed to do. I feel like that's really missing today. So sounds like you had time to reflect on that, and that gave you guidance and ability to be congruent with who you are and what you're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. And, to that point about the whole COVID lockdown, and you and I spoke about this before, as an introvert, it was kind of awesome to me. Yes. Because, I was also going through grief at that time and all the other things. But the reality was it just gave me time and space and quiet and solitude. And I loved it. I truly loved it.
Yeah. Same for that part for sure. I have thrived in it. And so it's been, interesting. And it's actually changed a little bit of how I work, if in a good way. So another example of embracing what is, and in I'm not even saying most instances, I think in all, the universe has our back and things are actually meant for our good. We just don't always see it and understand it at the moment, but I do believe that.
I totally believe it as well. And for me, it's shifted the way that I am doing business as well, because during that time in 2020, I started getting into, getting into trading. I had never done stock market, anything, futures trading, nothing. And fast forward to today, that's now part of Lucra, because it was always about wealth and growing business income. But then it started being trading, and now I'm teaching trading. So it's like that would have never happened. I think had Sean not passed away, and then COVID pandemic happened. So
yes, easy to look back and see, not as easy in the time, but I totally agree and am congruent with that thought process. With the Way to Wealth podcast, we do focus on making money simple. So I always like to ask, if you're able to remember, what's your earliest childhood memory of money? And let me tell you why I ask. I think we're conditioned and we don't even know it. Again, we're pre-programmed at times in life with these certain creases that are made in our brain that can affect us. And if we can recognize, then we can break out of that. So I always just am curious to hear if you're able to remember what's your earliest childhood memory of money.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've actually done a lot of work on this, because with my situation with bankruptcy and all of this, a lot of that was just all the external stuff. The reason that happened was because of the internal stuff, my ideas about scarcity and worth and value and all of this other stuff. And a lot of that came from in childhood. I grew up on the North Shore of Chicago, and there was a lot of money in that area. Now, my family didn't necessarily have a ton of money. We were fine. I mean, there was nothing that we needed or didn't have. But in comparison to a lot of the people that I went to school with, let's say, I felt like one of the, not so wealthy kids. And that to me turned into, and this took me years to realize this. And looking back, I'm like, wow, like what a mess I made of just that, because that really wasn't that big of a deal. We were totally fine. It was all good. But what I turned that into was I looked at the people who I assumed had just wealth. I mean, in our neighborhood, I'll give you an example. Maybe not even in our neighborhood, but at my school, kids would get brand new fancy cars for their 16th birthday. And then let's say, because we were all dumb 16-year-olds, that kid goes out and wrecks the car the next weekend. Well, they would just get another one. And I'm like, what? Like, I just looked at that as just gross accumulation and wealth. And I was much more interested in saving the kids in Africa at that time and all of this. But here's what happened internally. And again, it took me a long time. I wish it didn't take so long, but it took forever to realize this. I was like, wow, what I did based on my experiences back then was I actually said that to me, I don't want that. I don't want the money. I don't want that accumulation. I don't want that materialism that I saw. So much so that I was like, screw you, money. It's not even about the money. I'm going to go into business and I'm going to do this for, the good of humanity. And it's not about the money. I always said that. It's not about the money. And guess what happened? Yeah. Then I didn't have any. So that is my earliest memory of just seeing, something that I probably wanted so desperately, but not having it. And so then just deciding, unconsciously, of course, that I'm like, well, screw that. I don't want it anyway, because I don't have it or I can't have it. And that created a big mess in my life, as I have mentioned.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I've shared on, so I won't share mine, but certainly coming from a place that money was complicated and mom and dad struggling with it. That's what set me on the path that I'm on today. And there's the whole story about that, including bankruptcy with mom and dad. You did make me think of something I forgot about, though. You're talking about a vehicle in high school. So I can remember they didn't have money and dad bought this used Lincoln. And this thing was a freaking boat. It was huge. And he was like, oh no, this is a Lincoln Continental. And it was green, like my grass outside green with a white top and white pleather interior. Oh, but wait, it gets better. Dad was a Baptist minister, so he thought it would be so cool to get Baptist on the license plate. So I got to drive this thing to school. Needless to say, I didn't do it much, but it was like, oh my gosh. He's like, this is a Lincoln Continental, son. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Lincoln. It's grass green. It's got a white top, white leather interior, and Baptist license plates. Let's just say I didn't take that and pick up many dates. Nonetheless, as you made me think about that, was like, oh no, erase. I forgot about that. So anyway, had to share. Thank you for sharing that. And we all have that. And it's like, yeah, and then we can, you can't heal from the Lincoln thing, but you can heal from other stuff as far as money. You have, right, this, like I said, it's like you've lived many lives. So there's lots of wisdom and experience you can share. So one, going from 6 figures in debt, eviction, foreclosure, bankruptcy, to building a successful business. You've already shared some of that. What would you say, you've learned from that could be a takeaway for listeners that they could learn from what you've been through and what you've learned?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about, not having so many F's to give. There's that book by Mark Manson, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F.
100%.
And it truly is that, I believe, because I think I got that to some extent earlier on. It's like, okay, if I am afraid to put my work out there, or afraid to sell something or make an offer, well, what is that actually saying about what I'm offering? Like, do I even believe in it? Do I trust that it will do what I'm saying that it will do? So there was a little bit of that. And then once my husband passed away, it was like, really, I don't care because there's so much more important things in life to command our attention and to focus on, like our relationships, like our health and well-being. Money, now I very much honor money in my life, but it's still secondary to all of these other much more crucial things. So I would say really just being able to get out of your own way. Ryan Holiday has that book, Ego is the Enemy. And I think that that's true. Our ego is always trying to protect and defend us, and not ego in the arrogant sense, but ego in the sense of like playing small and not really shining our light and doing what we are here to do. Yeah. And just letting go of all of that and being like, okay, this is who I am. This is what I've got for you. If you're interested, awesome. If you're not, also awesome. Like, I really don't care anymore. Yeah. So that's the main thing.
Yeah. There's so much truth in that. And it has our back. The universe does has our back. So embracing that and being what is, and embracing, acceptance of the moment and going with what exactly is happening, recognizing that it is for the good. You mentioned these things that have happened in life that, again, not all of them have been easy. And so you've had to start over multiple times. How have you been able to do that? And what can you share there? Like, and you mentioned picking yourself up, like, and that's been the thing. Look, all right, I'm getting back up. We're going to go at it again. What has given you that? And, I've asked this before, because you can see even in kids from different families, sometimes some are more resilient than others. And I've often asked myself, even in mine, I'm seeing with my siblings and looking at other families, and it's like, what causes that? Why are some more resilient than others? So I would love to learn what caused you to get back up and to go at it again. And what do you think makes some people more resilient than others?
Yeah, I think for me, it is ultimately just pure tenacity. I'm way too stubborn of a person to be like, oh, guess that didn't work. Like, I will just go and go and go until I'll figure it out. Right. I mean, that's kind of the simple answer. The probably better answer is, and this can work for anything, whether it's a business, a relationship, whatever, it's remember why you started. What was that initial spark or that initial reason that you pursued that path in the first place? And if you can get back to that, what were some of the hopes? What were some of the dreams? What were some of the goals back then? Because I think a lot of times as we go through this life, all of those hopes and dreams and goals, they just kind of get dusty, and we're just doing the day-to-day thing. We're doing whatever. And if you can go back and brush those off and really clean them up and shine them up a bit, that, to me, keeping the focus on that is how I continue to go forward in any of these pursuits, because I remember why I started. Well, I started to be an inspiration or to inspire other people to do what they're here to do. like I said earlier, I've been kind of an adventurer by nature, but if I can use my example to say to somebody else, hey, like that's awesome, but it's not about me in this case. What about you? What are you here to do? What is your purpose going forward? What are all of these gifts along the way? And sometimes the gifts are not so pleasant or pretty, but these gifts along the way have culminated. I call this thing heart path, because I think our heart always drives us forward on the path. We can't ever be off of that path. It's always going to guide us in the right way. Ego gets in the way, mind gets in the way, fear, insecurity, doubt, all that crap gets in the way.
Yeah.
But as long as we maintain this thing, and I think a great example is just to remember why you started, that can help just to take one more step forward and one more step forward and one more step forward.
Yeah, that's good. And I mean, that's what we're here to do. And that makes me think of, so we initially met either through Angie or Rich, my partners in Legato Family, and like the piece in Legato Family that I bring is the structure, and we call it family constitution. And it's like, okay, it's one thing to leave money, but if you just left money to the next generation, and number one, that's not where it's at. But number two, you're almost taking away the opportunity for your kids and grandkids to learn these valuable lessons, that's what they're here to do. Like what you've went through, money can't give you what you have went through in these life experiences. And so even in that scenario, when I start a family constitution, or I recommend someone as they're writing we call it now 7th generation family constitution, it's the why. Why are we leaving these values behind? If we're going to use money, why are we recommending using it this way? And I feel like that's what you were saying, like that, remembering why you did any of this, like, what started you on this path, and leaving that to the next generation. I think that's great advice. I've heard you write about or mention wealth mindset, and you mentioned something else as far as what you offer now at Lucra as far as trading and such. Would love to hear a little bit more about both wealth mindset and what your thoughts on trading and maybe making money.
Okay, so let me start with the trading part, because that's a
Sure.
more concise answer. For me, trading is such a great fit for who I am and my lifestyle. Again, I don't need to go out into the world. Like, I'm not that social, so I can sit here, and I love that everything's online now instead of, trading futures in a crazy pit somewhere. That wouldn't have worked out for me at all. But I really love the idea of being able to make money by being here in my solitude and clicking some buttons, also not having to convince anybody that my programs could be awesome. Like, I don't have to market it at all. I just need to make a good decision and then watch it play out or not. There's certainly wins and losses. But what I love about it so much is that it just suits me so well. And I don't think I'll ever give up my other coaching stuff, but it's a great other alternative that I can really just dig into. And to then go into the psychology aspect or the wealth mindset aspect, that's really what I love about trading. Because once you learn the basics and how to do all the things on the platform, the whole thing is psychology. And I love that so much that I'm like, okay, what do we need to do to overcome fear or greed or revenge trading, which a lot of people get into, all these different things. And that to me is the best part. It's the mindset aspect. And with wealth mindset, I mentioned earlier, like I've done a lot of work on this myself. The first thing is always recognizing when scarcity shows up in your brain and watching yourself make decisions or take actions based on what? Are you basing it, like, are you coming from scarcity or are you coming from abundance? And so being able to be aware of that primarily, where am I coming from right now? What state am I in right now? That's first. And then secondly, once you are aware of that, once you have noticed that in yourself, it's like, okay, well, how do I want to be reacting to this situation? Or how do I want to continue to play this game? I'll give you a perfect example, Scott. I remember right after my husband had passed away, I don't know what happened, but I was like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to make money again. Like that was, I just like fear and overwhelm and of course shock and grief, all the things that happen. I was terrified that I was never going to be able to make money again. And I had to catch myself and be like, Mindie Kniss, hello. Even before you were in partnership business-wise with him, you still were able to run a 6-figure company. Like, if you did it then, don't you think that probably you could do it again, or at least figure it out, or maybe even better now that you've learned a lot more stuff? But it was like this completely irrational, crazy thought that I was like, I am never going to be able to make money again. What am I going to do? That makes no sense. But I had to do that. I had to take those steps. I had to be aware of it first and then say, hold up, what? No, like that is not the way that I'm going to continue to play this. And it would show up again and again and again. And every time then I would have to like wrangle it back and be like, no, like this is not, I'm not going to play this scarcity game. I'm not going to play the fear game. I want to go forward with an abundance mentality, with a wealth mindset. So with that, what is the next decision I need to make, or what is the next action I need to take?
Yeah, that's great advice. It makes me think of Warren Buffett, likely the greatest investor of all time. And yes, he learned from Benjamin Graham on how do you find value in the market. So he's looking for, something that's trading at a discount that has growth opportunities. And yes, that is part of his methodology that he learned from Benjamin Graham. However, I think his best by far skill set is temperament and mindset. So one of his favorites, famous sayings is be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. But he's so disciplined and his temperament's just rock solid. And so that mindset, I believe, is what has made him the greatest investor of all time. So I think we all can learn from that and keep ourselves in check. One additional question I always like to ask, Mindie, is to share with the audience, what do you think's been the best piece of financial advice that you've ever received?
Yeah, you're going to almost think this is funny because it's so simplistic, but it truly is this: save more. Save more. And I'll tell you why. After going through my situation with bankruptcy and debt and all of that stuff, I became very, very disciplined with my money. My husband, on the other hand, though, he loved to spend money, and we made pretty good money. And his thing was, let me say this too, because this will make sense to the story. He had a very severe disability. So he wasn't necessarily planning to live a long, long, long life. And he was like, hey, if I only have another few years, like we might as well have a good time. Let's get the houses, let's get the cars, let's, do all these things and spend essentially all the money. So we never really had solid savings. We had some things, but then once he passed away, I was like, okay, like really, I'm now starting from scratch. There wasn't any life insurance or anything because of his disability. And so saving more. So even if you had, like whomever, the listener, even if you have a partner like I did that loved to spend, like that's cool, they could do their own thing. But what I would have loved to have done differently is to even myself saved more, just because you never know what is going to happen.
No, I think it's great advice. And like the way to wealth, the way is living now. So there's a balance of that, of what, he did. Your husband is like, yeah, let's fully live. And I agree with that. And, when you think about saving, and it's like saving makes sense. So we break it out like 3 buckets of savings, income, and growth in that order. Once the foundation is in place, we look at money, and most basically categorize saving and investing as the same. Oh, I am saving. I'm putting money in my 401k. That's actually not saving. That's investing. And you should invest. Savings is emergency opportunity funds. I just think, as a country, we really don't teach that well and can do a better job. And like when you think of savings being emergency, that's not sexy or exciting, but opportunity, that's kind of cool. And like, you're basically building your warehouse of wealth, your capital. Who doesn't want more capital?
Exactly.
All of us, right? So I think that's great advice. If we just said save more, that's solid. Is there anything else, Mindie, that you would want that you kind of feel into or think about that you would want to share with the audience while they're listening that you think would be helpful from a life perspective or from a money perspective?
Yeah, and to me, it's kind of one and the same. I really, really, truly believe that we all do have a very, very powerful purpose. And the more you can understand that about yourself, the more you can get in alignment with yourself, it does happen that you can figure out how to make that a financially viable path as well, because people get paid to do all kinds of crazy things these days, especially with the internet. It's so easy to do online business these days. And my advice for any listener is, if there is a dream or just a little inkling in your heart, I hope that you can pull it out and just reclaim it, and then see what's even one step I could take toward this thing. Maybe it won't be a business, but maybe it just adds more joy to your life. Awesome. So it's like we tend to put away those dreams and those goals from earlier on in our life. And I'm like, no, get them back up, get them back out, and let's go.
Yeah, 100%. How would you say people want to learn more about you and Lucra? What would be the best way for them to contact and learn more?
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And lucra.com is where everything is. So it's lucra.com. All of my courses, events, etc., everything is there.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining. You've definitely shared knowledge, enjoyed the conversation just as I did when you interviewed me. So we'll have to run this back at another time. But thanks for joining. And everyone, we'll catch you next week on another edition of the Way to Wealth podcast, where we're all about making money simple so you can fully live today.
The opinions voiced in Way to Wealth with Scott Ford, Managing Director, Partner, and Wealth Advisor of Carson Wealth, are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial, or tax advisor prior to investing. Guests on Way to Wealth are not affiliated with CWM LLC or Cetera Advisor Networks LLC. Legato Family is not affiliated with Cetera Advisor Networks LLC or CWM LLC. Carson Wealth, 19833 Leitersburg Pike, Suite 1, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21742.